The discipline of self-control. Welcome to the new audiobook video. Every reaction you give either builds your peace or destroys it. In the span of a single moment between what happens to you and how you respond, lies your entire life. Not the life you imagine, not the life you wish for, but the life you are actually living, breath by breath, choice by choice, reaction by reaction. Self-control is not suppression. It is not the art of swallowing your truth or hiding your feelings behind a mask of composure. It is something far deeper, far more powerful. It is mastery. The kind of mastery that allows you to be present with what you feel without being controlled by it, to acknowledge what arises within you without letting it dictate your actions. It is learning to pause before you speak, to think before you act, and to observe before you judge. This pause, this sacred space between stimulus and response, is where your power lives. It is the difference between reacting from emotion and responding from wisdom, between being pushed by circumstance and being guided by clarity. The one who controls their inner world shapes their outer world. This is not a metaphor. This is observable truth. Your external reality is a mirror of your internal state. The chaos you see around you began as chaos within you. The peace you seek in your environment must first be cultivated in your being, because the strongest person isn't the loudest one. It is not the one who dominates conversations or demands attention or forces their will upon others. The strongest person is the one who stays calm when everything demands a reaction, the one who can sit in the fire of provocation and not be burned, the one who witnesses their own anger, their own fear, their own impulse, and then chooses differently. This is the power we speak of. Not the power to control others, but the power to master yourself. Not the power to avoid feeling, but the power to feel fully without being swept away. Not the power to silence your humanity, but the power to guide it with wisdom. And this power is not reserved for the enlightened few. It is available to you. Right now. In this moment. Through awareness, through practice, through the patient work of learning to watch your mind instead of being lost in it. The journey begins here, with the simple recognition that you are not your reactions. You are the awareness that can choose how to respond. And in that choice lies everything. Chapter 1. Control begins with awareness. You can't control what you don't notice. This is the first law of inner mastery, and it is absolute. Before discipline, before restraint, before any change in behavior can occur, there must first be awareness. You must see the pattern before you can shift it. You must witness the impulse before you can redirect it. You must catch the thought at its inception before it cascades into action. Every word, emotion, and impulse begins as a small signal in the mind. A flicker, a whisper, a subtle movement in your inner landscape that, if left unobserved, grows into something larger, something more insistent, something that feels inevitable and beyond your control. But it is not inevitable. Nothing is. In that first moment, when the signal is still quiet, when the impulse is still forming, you have infinite power. You can observe it. You can pause. You can choose. But this power is only available if you are awake enough to notice what is happening within you. Most people live their entire lives asleep to themselves. They feel anger and immediately speak it. They feel fear and immediately run from it. They feel desire and immediately chase it. There is no space between the feeling and the action. No gap, no pause. Just automatic response, mechanical reaction, like a machine executing pre-programmed commands. And then they wonder why their life feels out of control, why they keep repeating the same patterns, why they say things they regret, why they act in ways that betray their values. The answer is simple. They have never learned to watch. They have never developed the capacity to observe themselves from a place of stillness. They are lost in the stream of their own consciousness, swept along by every current of thought and emotion. But you can step out of the stream. You can stand on the bank and watch the water flow. You can witness your thoughts without being your thoughts. You can feel your emotions without becoming your emotions. This is awareness, and awareness changes everything. If you slow down enough to see it, you can guide it. This is the promise. This is the practice. Slow down. Not externally. You don't need to move through life at a crawl. But internally, create space, create silence, create the conditions where the subtle movements of your inner world become visible. How do you do this? Through attention, through the deliberate practice of turning your awareness inward again and again until it becomes natural, until the watcher within you is always present. always observing, always aware of what is arising in your consciousness. Begin with the breath. This is the anchor, the doorway, the most reliable tool for cultivating inner awareness. Your breath is always with you, always accessible, always happening in the present moment. When you bring your attention to your breath, you are immediately here, now, present. Breathe slowly. Notice the inhale. Notice the pause at the top. Notice the exhale. Notice the pause at the bottom. Don't force anything. Don't control the breath artificially. Just watch it. Just be with it. And in this simple act of watching, you are training awareness. As you watch your breath, you will notice that thoughts arise. This is normal.
This is what minds do.
They produce thoughts constantly, endlessly, like a factory that never closes. But here is where the practice deepens. Instead of following the thought, instead of getting caught in the story it wants to tell, simply notice that a thought has appeared. Label it silently, thinking, and then return to the breath. A feeling arises, perhaps frustration that you can't focus, perhaps boredom with the practice, perhaps anxiety about something in your life. Again, don't follow it. Don't analyze it. Don't build a narrative around it. Simply notice, feeling, and return to the breath. This is the training. This is how awareness is built. Not through dramatic insight or sudden enlightenment, but through thousands of small moments of noticing and returning, over and over, patiently, gently, without judgment. And as you practice this with your breath, you begin to notice something remarkable. You begin to see the space between stimulus and response. You begin to catch yourself before you react. You begin to recognize patterns in your thoughts and emotions that were previously invisible. Someone says something that triggers you. In the past, you would have responded immediately, defensively, automatically. But now, having trained awareness, you notice something different. You feel the heat rising in your body. You notice the thought forming, "They're attacking me. I need to defend myself." You see the impulse to speak sharply, to counter, to protect. But because you are aware, because you have practiced seeing these movements in your consciousness, you have a choice. You can pause. You can take one breath, and in that breath, that momentary pause, you can choose differently. You can respond from wisdom instead of reacting from wounding. This is the power of awareness. It doesn't eliminate your emotions or impulses. It doesn't make you into some kind of emotionless robot, but it gives you space. It gives you choice. It gives you the ability to be present with what you feel without being controlled by it. But when you rush, react, or defend, you hand your power away. This is what most people do most of the time. They give their power to whoever or whatever triggered them. They allow external events to dictate their internal state. They let circumstances pull their strings like a puppet, dancing to whatever tune the world plays, and then they feel powerless. Because they are. Not because they lack inherent power, but because they've given it away through unconscious reaction, through allowing their automatic patterns to run unchecked, through never learning to pause, to observe, to choose. Think about the last time you reacted in a way you later regretted. Perhaps you spoke harshly to someone you love. Perhaps you made an impulsive decision that created problems. Perhaps you let anger or fear drive your actions. In that moment, where was your awareness? Were you present? Were you observing? Or were you lost in the emotion, swept away by the impulse, identified completely with the reactive pattern? Most likely you were not aware. You were on autopilot, and autopilot follows old programming, old patterns, old ways of being that were formed long ago and have been running unchecked ever since. But here is the hope, the possibility, the invitation. You can wake up. You can develop the capacity to stay present even in triggering moments. You can learn to observe yourself with enough clarity that you catch the pattern before it fully executes. And in that catching, you reclaim your power. Awareness is the gatekeeper. It is the guardian standing at the door between your inner world and your outer expression. It is what determines whether an impulse becomes an action, whether a thought becomes a word, whether an emotion becomes a behavior. Without awareness, you have no gate. Everything that arises within you flows directly outward, unfiltered, unexamined, unchecked. You are raw reactivity, a conduit for whatever your conditioning has programmed you to be. But with awareness, you have choice. The gate is guarded. What arises within you is witnessed, observed, felt fully, and then you decide. Consciously, intentionally, from a place of presence rather than pattern. This is how you stop your mind from running your life, not by suppressing it or controlling it through force, but by watching it with such clarity that its movements become transparent. You see the thought arising. You see the emotion building. You see the impulse forming, and in that seeing, you are no longer enslaved to it. Let me give you a practice, something concrete you can work with immediately. Throughout your day, at random moments, pause and check in with yourself. Set a reminder on your phone if you need to, or let certain activities serve as triggers. Every time you open a door, every time you wash your hands, every time you sit down, in that moment of pause, ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? What am I thinking right now? What is the quality of my inner state? Don't judge what you find. Don't try to change it immediately. Just notice it. Observe it with the same neutral curiosity you might bring to watching clouds pass through the sky. Oh, there's anxiety. Oh, there's irritation. Oh, there's scattered thinking. This simple practice, repeated throughout your day, begins to build awareness. It interrupts the automatic flow of unconscious living. It creates little pockets of presence, little moments of waking up that gradually expand and connect until awareness becomes your default state, rather than your occasional achievement. And as awareness grows, something else happens naturally, organically, without force. You begin to see the patterns more clearly. You notice that certain triggers consistently produce certain responses. You recognize that you have habitual ways of thinking, habitual emotional reactions, habitual behavioral patterns. This recognition is not for the purpose of self-judgment. It is for the purpose of choice. Because once you see the pattern clearly, once you recognize it as it's happening, you can decide whether to continue running it or to choose something different. Perhaps you notice that criticism always triggers defensiveness in you. In the past, this happened so quickly you didn't even know it was a pattern. Someone would criticize you, and you'd be defending yourself before you even consciously registered what was happening. But now, with awareness, you catch it. You feel the defensiveness rising. You see the pattern beginning to execute, and you have a choice. Run the pattern or pause and respond differently. This is the power of awareness. It doesn't automatically change your patterns, but it makes change possible. It creates the space where different choices can be made. It illuminates the automatic mechanisms that have been running your life, bringing them out of darkness into light where they can be examined and, if necessary, transformed. Now let's go deeper into what awareness actually is, because there are common misconceptions that can lead people astray. Awareness is not thinking about your thoughts. It is not analyzing, interpreting, or creating narratives about your inner experience. That is still mental activity, still the mind operating, just in a more reflective mode. True awareness is prior to thinking. It is the witnessing presence that observes thinking without being caught up in it. Awareness is not judgment. Many people, when they begin to watch their thoughts and emotions, immediately start judging themselves. I shouldn't be thinking this. This emotion is wrong. I'm doing this wrong. But judgment is just more mental activity, more thoughts piled on top of the original thoughts. Awareness is neutral. It simply sees what is without adding layers of interpretation or evaluation. Awareness is not trying to change what you observe. When you become aware of anxiety, the immediate impulse might be to make it go away, to fix it, to change it into something more pleasant. But this is resistance, and resistance actually reinforces what you resist. True awareness allows what is present to be present. It doesn't push away or grasp after. It simply observes with acceptance. This accepting quality of awareness is crucial. It is what allows you to be with difficult emotions without being overwhelmed by them. When you can observe your anger without judging it as bad, without trying to suppress it, without being consumed by it, something remarkable happens. The anger loses its power over you. You can feel it fully, understand its message, and then decide how to respond, all while maintaining your center, your clarity, your presence. This is what the ancient wisdom traditions called equanimity. It is the ability to remain balanced and centered, regardless of what is arising in your experience. Not because nothing affects you, but because you have developed the capacity to be with whatever affects you without losing yourself in it. Imagine standing by the ocean. Waves come in one after another endlessly. Some are small, some are large, some crash violently, some roll in gently. But you, standing on the shore, are not the waves. You witness them. You might get wet, you might feel their force, but you don't become the waves. You remain yourself, watching the constant movement of the water. This is your relationship with your thoughts and emotions when awareness is cultivated. They arise like waves, they move through your consciousness, they have their moment and they pass. But you are not them. You are the awareness that witnesses them, and from this place of witnessing, you have power. Not the power to stop the waves. They will keep coming. But the power to choose how you relate to them, how you respond to them, whether you let them pull you under or whether you remain steady. Let me tell you about the layers of awareness, because it deepens progressively as you practice. The first layer is basic observation. You notice that you're thinking. You notice that you're feeling something. This is huge even though it sounds simple. Most people never reach even this level of awareness. They are completely identified with their thoughts and feelings, no separation, no space. The second layer is recognition of patterns. You start to notice that certain situations trigger certain responses in you consistently. You begin to see your habitual reactions, your default patterns. Oh, I always get defensive when someone questions my work. I always withdraw when I feel hurt. This pattern, recognition, is powerful because it allows you to anticipate and interrupt automatic responses. The third layer is awareness of the arising. You begin to catch thoughts and emotions at their inception. Before they gain momentum, you feel the first stirring of anger. You notice the first whisper of a judgmental thought. This is incredibly valuable because it's much easier to redirect something at its beginning than after its built-up force. The fourth layer is awareness of awareness itself. You become conscious not just of what you're experiencing, but of the fact that you are the one experiencing it. You recognize yourself as the awareness itself, not the content of awareness. This is sometimes called meta-awareness or consciousness of consciousness, and it represents a profound shift in how you relate to your inner experience. But you don't need to reach these deeper layers to benefit from awareness practice. Even basic observation consistently applied will transform your life. Because even at the simplest level, awareness gives you what you've never had before. Choice, and choice is everything. Choice is the difference between reacting mechanically and responding wisely. Choice is the difference between being a victim of your conditioning and being the conscious author of your life. Choice is the difference between being tossed around by every wind of circumstance and standing steady in your own center. So begin simply. Don't try to achieve some advanced state of awareness. Just practice noticing. Throughout your day, remember to observe. Watch your thoughts like you would watch birds flying across the sky. Feel your emotions like you would feel the weather on your skin. Present to them, aware of them, but not defined by them. And be patient with yourself. Awareness is a skill, and like any skill, it develops through practice. You will forget to be aware. You will get lost in reactive patterns. You will fall asleep to yourself again and again. This is normal. This is part of the process. The practice is not to never forget, but to remember again, to wake up again, to return to awareness over and over with patience and kindness toward yourself. Because here is the truth. You are already awareness. You don't need to create it or achieve it. You simply need to recognize it, to rest in it, to identify with it rather than with the passing content of your consciousness. You are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. You are not your impulses. You are the aware presence in which all of these arise, move, and pass away. And from this place of awareness, from this grounded presence, control becomes possible. Not control as suppression, not control as rigid management, but control as conscious choice. As the ability to observe what arises and decide with clarity and wisdom how you will respond. This is where mastery begins. Not in doing, but in seeing. Not in forcing, but in witnessing. Not in fighting your nature, but in becoming conscious of it so that you can work with it skillfully. The journey of self-control begins here, with this simple practice of awareness. Return to it again and again. Make it your foundation, because everything else we will explore. The mastery of speech, the training of mind, the management of emotion, all of it rests on this one essential capacity, the ability to see yourself clearly, in real time as life unfolds. You can't control what you don't notice. So learn to notice. Practice seeing. Cultivate the witness within you who observes without judgment, who is present without agenda, who simply sees what is and creates space for something new to emerge. This is the beginning. This is the foundation. This is where your power awakens. Chapter 2. Mastering the mouth. Your words create your environment. This is not a metaphor. This is not spiritual poetry. This is observable, measurable reality. The words you speak shape the world around you. They determine the quality of your relationships. They influence how others perceive you. They create ripples that extend far beyond the moment of speaking, affecting situations and outcomes you may never directly witness. But more than this, your words shape you. They reinforce your identity. They program your subconscious. They either build your power or drain it. Every sentence that leaves your mouth is a declaration of who you are, what you believe, and what you're creating in your life. And once spoken, these words cannot be called back. They have been released into the world, and their effects, however subtle or dramatic, are permanent. Every sentence is energy leaving your body. Think about this deeply. When you speak, you are not just making sound. You are directing life force. You are channeling your attention, your emotion, your intention into vibration that travels through space and impacts everything it touches. This is power, enormous power. And most people use this power unconsciously, carelessly, reactively, never considering the consequences of their words until damage has been done. Once spoken, it cannot return. You can apologize. You can clarify. You can try to soften or reframe what you've said. But you cannot unsay it. The words have entered the consciousness of whoever heard them, and they have done their work. They have created an impression, triggered an emotion, planted a seed, and that seed will grow whether you intended it to or not. This is why mastery of speech is so crucial, because your mouth is one of your most powerful tools, and also one of your most dangerous weapons. It can build bridges or burn them. It can heal wounds or deepen them. It can inspire and uplift, or it can damage and destroy. And the difference between these outcomes often comes down to a single moment of choice, to speak or not to speak. And if you speak, to choose your words with conscious intention, rather than unconscious reaction. To master your mouth is to master your vibration. Everything is vibration. This is not mystical philosophy, this is physics. Sound itself is vibration, and the quality of vibration you emit through your words affects not just those who hear you, but your own energetic state. When you speak from anger, you reinforce anger within yourself. When you speak from fear, you amplify fear. When you speak from wisdom, you cultivate wisdom. Your words don't just express your state, they create it, perpetuate it, strengthen it. To speak with purpose, not impulse. This is the practice. This is the discipline. This is what separates reactive communication from conscious communication. Most people speak impulsively. A thought arises and immediately it becomes words. A feeling surges and instantly they verbalize it. There is no pause, no filter, no conscious choice, just automatic expression of whatever is moving through their consciousness in that moment. But you can choose differently. You can insert space between the impulse to speak and the act of speaking. You can ask yourself, is this necessary? Is this true? Is this kind? Is this the right time? Is this the right person? Am I speaking from reactivity or from clarity? These questions, asked in the pause before speaking, can save you from countless regrets and repair work. Silence is often stronger than speech. This is perhaps the most difficult lesson to learn about communication, because we live in a culture that values expression, that encourages us to share our thoughts and feelings constantly, that equates silence with weakness or disengagement. But this is a profound misunderstanding of power. There is tremendous strength in choosing not to speak, in witnessing your urge to respond, to defend, to explain, to convince, and choosing silence instead. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you recognize that saying nothing is the wiser choice. Because some situations don't require your voice. Because some provocations are best answered with stillness. Because sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. Let me take you deeper into the mechanics of speech and why it matters so much for self-mastery. When you speak without awareness, you are essentially vomiting your internal state onto others. Whatever you're feeling, frustration, anxiety, excitement, resentment, comes pouring out in your words, often disguised as communication but really just emotional discharge. You're using other people as repositories for your unprocessed emotions, and this creates toxicity in your relationships and in your own consciousness. But when you speak with awareness, something completely different happens. You first become conscious of what you're feeling. You observe the emotion without being consumed by it. You feel the impulse to speak arising. And then you make a choice. Is expressing this going to serve the situation? Is it going to serve the other person? Is it going to serve my own growth and integrity? Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes it's important to express what you're feeling, to be honest, to speak your truth. But even then, awareness allows you to choose how you express it. You can speak your truth from a grounded place rather than from emotional reactivity. You can be honest without being cruel. You can be direct without being aggressive. You can express difficult feelings without creating unnecessary damage. And sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes you recognize that speaking in this moment would only create confusion, hurt, or unnecessary conflict. That what you're feeling is temporary and doesn't need to be expressed. That silence or a simple acknowledgement would be more appropriate. And in those moments, mastery means choosing not to speak, even when every fiber of your being wants to. This is not suppression. Let me be very clear about this because it's a crucial distinction. Suppression is pushing down your feelings, pretending they don't exist, refusing to acknowledge them even to yourself. This is unhealthy and ultimately damaging. What we're talking about is something entirely different. Conscious choice about whether and how to express what you're feeling. You can fully acknowledge your anger to yourself, feel it completely, understand its message, and still choose not to lash out verbally. You can recognize your hurt, validate your own experience of pain, and still choose not to speak from that wounded place. This isn't suppression, and it's wisdom. It's emotional maturity. It's the ability to be with your experience without being compelled to immediately externalize it. Now let's look at the specific ways that unconscious speech patterns damage your life and drain your power. Complaining is perhaps the most common and most toxic speech pattern. When you complain, you are doing several things simultaneously. You're reinforcing your victim identity, telling yourself and others that you are powerless in the face of your circumstances. You're directing your attention toward what's wrong, which makes you more likely to notice and experience more things that are wrong. You're lowering the vibrational frequency of your environment, bringing down not just your own energy, but the energy of everyone who has to listen to you. And most insidiously, complaining becomes a habit. The neural pathways associated with complaining get stronger with use, making it easier and more automatic to complain in the future. You literally train your brain to look for things to complain about. You become someone who cannot experience reality without immediately finding fault with it. But here's what's interesting. When you commit to eliminating complaining from your speech, when you catch yourself about to complain and choose silence or a neutral statement instead, something shifts. You break the pattern. You weaken that neural pathway, and you begin to notice that reality doesn't change, but your experience of it does. The same situations that would have triggered complaints now just are. You observe them without the compulsion to verbally process them as problems. Gossip is another pattern that drains enormous power. When you speak about others behind their backs, especially in negative or judgmental ways, you're not harming them. You're harming yourself. You're training your mind to focus on others' flaws and failures. You're positioning yourself as judge and critic, which is an exhausting role to play. You're creating distrust, because if you gossip about others, people naturally assume you gossip about them too. And perhaps most significantly, gossip keeps you focused on external rather than internal. It's so much easier to dissect someone else's life than to examine your own. So much easier to judge their choices than to take responsibility for yours. Gossip is a defense mechanism, a way of deflecting attention from your own shortcomings by highlighting others. Mastery means eliminating gossip entirely. If you cannot say something to someone's face, don't say it behind their back. If you have an issue with someone, address it directly with them or let it go. But don't discharge your feelings by talking about them to others. This discipline alone will dramatically shift the quality of your relationships and the clarity of your own mind. Explaining and justifying are more subtle patterns, but equally draining. Many people have an unconscious habit of over-explaining themselves. Someone asks where you've been, and instead of a simple answer, you launch into a detailed justification of your choices. Someone questions your decision, and you immediately feel compelled to defend it with elaborate reasoning. This pattern reveals insecurity. When you constantly feel the need to explain and justify yourself, you're essentially seeking approval and validation from others. You're giving them power over you by making their acceptance of your choices more important than your own acceptance of them. Mastery means being comfortable with simply stating what is, without feeling compelled to justify it. I chose this because it felt right for me. That's sufficient. You don't owe anyone an elaborate defense of your life choices, and the less you explain yourself, the more powerful your presence becomes, because you're rooted in your own authority rather than seeking external validation. Arguing and needing to be right is perhaps the most obvious way people drain their power through speech. How many hours of your life have you spent in pointless arguments, trying to convince someone of something, needing to prove that you're right and they're wrong? And at the end of these exchanges, what have you gained? Even if you win the argument, what have you actually won? A moment of ego satisfaction that fades immediately, leaving nothing of value behind. Mastery means letting go of the need to be right. This doesn't mean you don't have convictions or that you never express your views. It means you can state your perspective without needing the other person to agree with it. You can share your truth and let it stand without trying to force it on anyone. And when someone disagrees with you, you can let that be okay. You can even be curious about their perspective, recognizing that their different view doesn't threaten your own understanding. This is liberating. When you release the need to be right, you free up enormous energy. You stop wasting time and attention on futile attempts to change people's minds. You stop creating unnecessary conflict and tension. And paradoxically, when you stop trying to convince people, they often become more receptive to your views, because you're no longer triggering their defensive mechanisms. Now let's explore the positive dimensions of conscious speech, because mastery of the mouth is not just about what you don't say, it's equally about what you do say and how you say it. Speaking with precision is a powerful practice. Most people use vague, general language that doesn't actually communicate clearly. Things are bad. I'm upset about stuff. You always do that. This kind of imprecise speech creates confusion and misunderstanding. It also allows you to avoid looking directly at what's actually happening, which prevents real resolution. Precise speech means being specific. Instead of "things are bad," you might say, "I'm struggling with my workload this week." Instead of "I'm upset about stuff," you might say, "I felt hurt when you didn't acknowledge my contribution in the meeting." Instead of "you always do that," you might say, "In the last 3 interactions we've had, I noticed this pattern." Precision requires awareness. You have to actually know what you're thinking and feeling before you can articulate it clearly, and the practice of speaking precisely helps you develop that awareness. It forces you to look directly at your experience, to name it accurately, to take responsibility for it rather than hiding behind vague generalizations. Speaking with kindness is another dimension of mastery. This doesn't mean being artificially nice or sugarcoating everything. It means considering the impact of your words on others, recognizing that your speech has power, and choosing to use that power constructively rather than destructively. You can speak truth with kindness. You can deliver difficult feedback with compassion. You can set boundaries with respect. The goal is not to avoid saying things that might be uncomfortable, but to say them in ways that honor both your truth and the other person's humanity. This requires skill and practice. It's much easier to blurt out harsh truths or to avoid saying anything at all than it is to find the words that are both honest and kind. But this is where real communication happens, not in the extremes of brutal honesty or complete withholding, but in the nuanced middle ground where truth and kindness dance together. Speaking with intentionality means knowing why you're speaking. Before words leave your mouth, you pause and ask, what is my intention here? Am I speaking to inform? To connect? To clarify? To express? Or am I speaking to hurt? To dominate? To prove something? To discharge emotion? When you're clear on your intention, your words become much more effective and much less likely to create unintended consequences. Sometimes you'll catch yourself about to speak and realize your intention is not clean. You're about to share your perspective, but actually you're trying to prove someone wrong. You're about to be honest, but actually you're trying to hurt someone who hurt you. When you see this, you have a choice. Either purify your intention before speaking, or choose silence until you can speak from a clearer place. Let me share some specific practices for mastering speech, concrete techniques you can begin applying immediately. The 3-second pause. Before responding to anything that triggers an emotional reaction in you, pause for 3 seconds. Count slowly, 1, 2, 3. This tiny gap is often sufficient to interrupt the automatic reactive response and allow a more conscious choice to emerge. It seems simplistic, but it's remarkably effective. During those 3 seconds, take a breath. Feel your feet on the ground. Notice the impulse to speak without following it. Let it be there, acknowledged but not obeyed. And then, if you still choose to speak, do so from this slightly more grounded place. The necessity test. Before speaking, especially before sharing your opinion or perspective on something, ask yourself, is it necessary for me to say this? Not do I want to say this most, of course you want to, or you wouldn't be considering it. But is it necessary? Will this statement add value? Contribute something meaningful? Serve the situation or relationship? If the answer is no, practice silence. Let others carry the conversation. Notice how much you typically speak that isn't actually necessary, and experiment with saying less. You'll find that your words carry more weight when you speak less frequently, because people recognize that when you do speak, it's meaningful. The truth and kindness filter. Before speaking something difficult or potentially painful, run it through this two-part filter. First, is it true? Not your opinion, not your interpretation, but verifiably true. And second, is it kind? Not nice or sugar-coated, but rooted in care for the other person's well-being. If something is true but not kind, consider whether it needs to be said, and if so, how it can be said with maximum truth and maximum kindness. If something is kind but not true, don't say it. That's not kindness, it's manipulation disguised as compassion. And obviously, if something is neither true nor kind, silence is the only appropriate response. The reflection practice. At the end of each day, spend a few minutes reflecting on your speech. Where did you speak unconsciously? Where did you say things you regret? Where did you speak from reaction rather than response? But also, where did you pause effectively? Where did you choose silence over reactivity? Where did you communicate with clarity and consciousness? This reflection isn't for self-judgment. It's for learning, for seeing your patterns, for becoming more aware so that tomorrow you can make slightly better choices. Over time, this daily reflection creates significant shifts in your speech patterns. The fasting practice. Once a week, or even once a month if that feels more manageable, practice a period of deliberate silence, perhaps for a few hours, perhaps for a full day. During this time, you don't speak at all. You observe the constant urge to verbalize that arises. You notice all the things you would normally say that aren't actually necessary. You experience what it's like to simply be present without the compulsion to comment, explain, or express. This practice is incredibly revealing. Most people discover that they speak far more than they realized, often for no clear reason other than habit or discomfort with silence. The practice of deliberate silence helps you become more conscious of speech when you do engage in it. Now, let's address a common concern. If I master my speech, if I pause before speaking and choose my words carefully, won't I become inauthentic? Won't I lose spontaneity? Won't I seem calculated and controlled? This is a misunderstanding of what authenticity means. Authenticity is not unfiltered expression of every thought and feeling. That's not authenticity, and that's lack of self-control. True authenticity is expressing your genuine self from a place of consciousness rather than from unconscious patterns. When you master speech, you don't become less authentic. You become more authentic because you're no longer speaking from conditioning, from old wounds, from automatic defensive patterns. You're speaking from your true self, from clarity, from consciousness. Your words become aligned with your deepest values rather than your most surface reactivity. And spontaneity doesn't disappear. The pause before speaking doesn't have to be long. With practice, it becomes almost instantaneous. A micro gap that happens so quickly others don't even notice it, but that's sufficient for you to choose consciousness over automaticity. You can be both spontaneous and conscious. You can be both genuine and intentional. Let me tell you what happens over time when you commit to mastering your speech. First, you become far more comfortable with silence. What used to feel awkward or anxiety-producing becomes peaceful. You no longer feel compelled to fill every moment with words. You can sit with others in silence and feel connected rather than uncomfortable. Second, your relationships improve dramatically. People trust you more because you're not gossiping, not constantly complaining, not being reactive. They feel safer with you because they know you won't lash out verbally when you're upset. They value your words more because you speak less frequently and more meaningfully. Third, your own mind becomes quieter. There's a direct relationship between how much you speak and how noisy your mind is. When you practice conscious speech, when you're not constantly verbalizing every thought and feeling, your internal dialogue naturally calms down too. The mental chatter decreases because you're not reinforcing it through constant external expression. Fourth, you gain energy. You stop depleting yourself through unnecessary talking, explaining, arguing, complaining. You stop giving your power away by speaking reactively. You conserve your energy, and it becomes available for things that actually matter, for presence, for creativity, for deep connection, for your meaningful work. And finally, you develop real presence. When you're not caught in the compulsion to speak, when you've mastered the impulse to constantly verbalize your experience, you become more present to what is actually happening. You listen more deeply. You notice more subtly. You respond more appropriately. Your whole quality of presence shifts from reactive to receptive, from broadcasting to receiving. This is the power of mastering the mouth, not to become silent and withdrawn, not to suppress your voice, but to speak consciously, purposefully, with full awareness of the power your words carry. To use speech as a tool for building rather than destroying, for connecting rather than dividing, for expressing truth rather than discharging emotion. Your words create your environment. They shape your relationships, your reputation, your impact on others. But more than this, they shape you. They reinforce who you're becoming with every sentence. Every word you speak is either building the person you want to be or reinforcing the person you're trying to transcend. So choose your words as you would choose your actions, because that's what they are. Actions with consequences. Pause before speaking. Ask yourself if these words are necessary, true, kind. Consider whether silence might be more powerful than speech. And when you do speak, do so from consciousness rather than compulsion, from clarity rather than confusion, from wisdom rather than reactivity. Silence is often stronger than speech. Remember this, not because speech is wrong or should be avoided, but because conscious silence chosen intentionally is one of the most powerful expressions of self-mastery. The ability to witness the urge to speak and choose not to. The ability to be with your experience without needing to verbalize it. The ability to let moments unfold without needing to fill them with your commentary. This is mastery. This is power. This is what it means to master your mouth. Not to stop speaking entirely, but to speak only when it serves. Only when it's conscious. Only when it's aligned with your deepest intention. And in that mastery, you free yourself. Free from the compulsion to react. Free from the habit of unconscious expression. Free from the damage caused by words spoken without awareness. Free to use speech as the creative power it is, building the life and the relationships you truly desire, one conscious word at a time. Chapter 3. Training the mind. The mind is a wild engine. It races, compares and complains, left to its own devices. Untrained and unguided, your mind is like a wild horse running across open plains. It gallops from thought to thought with no clear direction, no purpose, no restraint. It chases after every distraction, every worry, every fantasy. It compares endlessly, comparing you to others, your present to your past, your reality to your expectations. And it complains constantly, finding fault with what is, resisting what cannot be changed, creating suffering where none is necessary. This is the natural state of the untrained mind. And if you observe your own thinking for even 5 minutes, you will see this truth directly. The mind does not rest. It does not settle naturally into peace. It generates thought after thought after thought, an endless stream of mental activity that continues even in your sleep, manifesting as dreams. But here is what most people never realize. You are not obligated to believe every thought your mind produces. You are not required to follow every mental pathway it wants to explore. You are not bound to the relentless chatter, the anxious projections, the repetitive loops of worry and rumination. If you let it drive unchecked, it will lead you toward anxiety and chaos. The untrained mind is a terrible navigator. It catastrophizes, imagining worst-case scenarios that rarely come to pass. It dwells on past hurts, replaying them endlessly, keeping wounds fresh that should have healed long ago. It creates stories about what others think, assigning meaning and motivation that may have no basis in reality. It judges everything and everyone, including and especially yourself. And all of this mental activity creates your experience of life. Not reality itself, but your experience of it. Two people can face identical circumstances and have completely different experiences, based solely on what their minds are doing with those circumstances. One mind creates suffering, another creates peace. Same situation, different mind, but the trained mind is your servant, not your master. This is the possibility. This is the promise of mental training. You can develop the capacity to work with your mind skillfully, to guide its attention, to quiet its compulsions, to use it as the powerful tool it is, rather than being used by it. The trained mind does not run wild. It settles when you need it to settle.
It focuses when you need it to focus.
It rests when you need it to rest. It still generates thoughts, and that's its nature. But you are no longer enslaved to those thoughts. You can observe them, evaluate them, and choose which ones to engage with and which ones to let pass. This is freedom. Real freedom. Not the freedom to control external circumstances, which is impossible, but the freedom to choose your relationship with your own thinking, which determines your experience of those circumstances. You don't need to eliminate thoughts. Let me be absolutely clear about this because it's a common misunderstanding that leads many people to abandon mental training entirely. The goal is not to achieve a blank mind, a state of no thought, some kind of mental void. That's not possible for most people, and it's certainly not necessary for mastery. Thoughts will arise. This is what minds do. They generate thoughts the way hearts beat and lungs breathe. It's their function. The training is not about stopping thoughts, but about changing your relationship with them. You just need to stop believing all of them, to stop being controlled by them, to stop identifying with them as you. There is you, the awareness, the consciousness, the observing presence. And there are thoughts, mental events that arise in that awareness. Most people collapse these two into one. They think they are their thoughts. When a thought says I'm not good enough, they believe I am not good enough. When a thought says this is terrible, they experience life as terrible. Complete identification with mental content. But you can learn to see thoughts as separate from yourself, as objects of awareness rather than the subject. You can learn to observe the thought I'm not good enough and recognize it as just that, a thought. A mental pattern, a neural firing. Not truth, not you, just a thought. And when you can do this, when you can witness your thoughts without being consumed by them, everything changes, because now you have choice. The thought arises, but you don't have to believe it. The worry appears, but you don't have to follow it. The judgment emerges, but you don't have to act on it. This is what it means to train the mind. To develop the capacity to observe mental activity without being swept away by it. To be present to your thinking without being possessed by it. To use your mind consciously rather than letting it use you unconsciously. Let me show you how this training actually works, because it's not abstract theory. It's practical skill development that anyone can engage in. The foundation of all mental training is meditation. Not meditation as some mystical practice reserved for spiritual seekers, but meditation as the simple, practical exercise of training attention. Just as you would go to a gym to train your body, you sit in meditation to train your mind. The basic practice is extraordinarily simple, which is why so many people underestimate its power. You sit comfortably. You bring your attention to a single point of focus, usually the breath, but it could be a sound, a sensation, or any anchor that exists in the present moment. And you rest your attention there. Within seconds, your mind will wander. A thought will arise and pull your attention away from the breath. You'll find yourself thinking about your to-do list, or replaying a conversation, or planning dinner, or judging how well you're meditating. This is not failure. This is the process. This wandering is what you're working with. When you notice that your mind has wandered, and this noticing is crucial, you gently bring your attention back to the breath. No judgment, no frustration, no story about how you're bad at this. Just return. Again and again. Thought arises, you notice, you return. Thought arises, you notice, you return. Thousands of times if necessary. This is the training. Each time you notice and return, you are strengthening your capacity for awareness. You are developing the mental muscle that allows you to recognize when you've been pulled into thought and to consciously redirect your attention. And this capacity, built through countless repetitions in meditation, becomes available to you throughout your day. You're in a conversation and notice your mind has wandered to what you're going to say next instead of listening. Because you've trained in meditation, you catch this and return your attention to actually listening. You're working and notice your mind has drifted to worry about a future event. You catch it and bring your attention back to the present task. You're upset and notice your mind is creating catastrophic stories about what might happen. You catch it and return to what's actually happening right now. This is how meditation training translates into everyday life. It's not about achieving some special state on the cushion. It's about building the fundamental capacity to notice where your attention is and to redirect it consciously. And this capacity changes everything. But meditation is just the beginning. Mental training extends into every aspect of your daily life. Because your mind is always active, always working, and every moment is an opportunity to train it or to let it run. One powerful practice is what might be called mental fasting, just as you might fast from food to give your digestive system a break and to develop discipline around eating. You can fast from certain types of thinking to give your mind a break and to develop discipline around thought. Choose one category of unnecessary thinking and commit to abstaining from it for a period of time. Perhaps it's worrying. For 1 week, every time you notice yourself worrying, you consciously interrupt the pattern and redirect your attention, not by suppressing the worry or pretending everything is fine, but by recognizing that worry is unproductive mental activity that doesn't solve problems or prevent negative outcomes. It just creates suffering in the present moment. Or perhaps it's comparison. Commit to noticing every time your mind compares you to others or your situation to someone else's, and consciously letting that comparison go, not engaging with it, not building stories around it, just noting comparing and returning to direct experience of your own life. Or perhaps it's judgment. For a week, fast from judging yourself, others, situations. Notice when judgment arises, which it will constantly, and simply observe it without feeding it. Let it pass without elaborating on it, without justifying it, without acting on it. These mental fasts are incredibly revealing. You discover how much of your mental activity falls into these categories, how much energy you waste on worry, comparison, and judgment. And as you practice interrupting these patterns, you begin to experience moments of mental quiet that you've perhaps never experienced before. Spaces where your mind is not racing, comparing, or complaining. Just present, just aware, just here. Another essential practice is questioning your thoughts. This comes from cognitive therapy but is rooted in ancient wisdom traditions. When a thought arises that creates suffering, anxiety, anger, sadness, insecurity, instead of believing it automatically, you question it. Is this thought true? Not does it feel true, but is it actually objectively, verifiably true? Most thoughts that create suffering are interpretations, assumptions, projection, not facts. Someone didn't respond to your message. The thought arises, they're mad at me. Is that true? You don't actually know. It's one possible interpretation among many. They might be busy. They might not have seen it. Their phone might be dead. They might have seen it and meant to respond but forgot. Is this thought helpful? Even if a thought is true or partially true, is dwelling on it serving you? Is it helping you take constructive action or just creating mental suffering? If someone genuinely is upset with you, is ruminating about it helpful, or would it be more useful to either address it directly or let it go? What evidence supports this thought? What evidence contradicts it? Thoughts often present themselves as absolute truth, but when you examine them, you find their selective interpretations based on limited data. Your mind highlights evidence that confirms the thought and ignores evidence that contradicts it. Deliberately looking for contradictory evidence breaks this pattern and reveals a more balanced perspective. This practice of questioning doesn't eliminate difficult thoughts, but it loosens their grip. It creates space between you and the thought. It allows you to see it as one possible interpretation, rather than as absolute reality. And in that space, you can choose how to respond rather than being compelled to react. Now let's talk about mental energy and attention management, because this is where most people lose control of their minds without even realizing it. Your attention is your most valuable resource. More valuable than your time, more valuable than your money, because wherever your attention goes, you go. Whatever you focus on becomes prominent in your experience. Attention is the currency of consciousness, and how you spend it determines the quality of your life. But most people allow their attention to be hijacked constantly by notifications on their devices, by other people's agendas, by entertainment and distractions, by worry and rumination. They give away their attention freely, unconsciously, without recognizing that they're giving away their life force itself. Training the mind means becoming extremely protective of your attention. It means consciously deciding where to place your focus and actively resisting the countless forces trying to capture it. This is not easy in the modern world, which is literally designed to fragment your attention and keep you in a state of constant distraction. But it's essential for mastery. Start by auditing your attention. For one day, notice where your attention goes. How much time do you spend on your phone without any conscious intention? How often do you check social media? How much mental energy goes to thinking about things you cannot change? How often does your mind wander during conversations or tasks? This audit will likely be shocking. Most people discover that they spend very little time in conscious, directed focus and enormous amounts of time in scattered, reactive attention. And this scattered attention creates a scattered life, a sense of never being fully present anywhere, of constantly feeling behind, of perpetual mental fatigue without clear accomplishment. Once you see how your attention is being spent, you can begin to reclaim it. This means creating boundaries around your focus. Perhaps certain times of day are device-free. Perhaps you batch process email instead of responding reactively throughout the day. Perhaps you engage in single tasking rather than multitasking, giving your full attention to one thing at a time. It also means training your attention to stay with chosen objects of focus for extended periods. In meditation, this is the breath. In work, this is the task at hand. In conversation, this is the person speaking. And when your attention wanders, which it will, you notice and return, over and over, building the capacity for sustained focus. This capacity for sustained attention is increasingly rare, and therefore increasingly valuable. Most people's attention span has been severely degraded by constant digital distraction. They can barely focus on anything for more than a few minutes before feeling compelled to check their phone, to seek new stimulation, to escape the slight discomfort of sustained engagement with one thing. But when you train your mind to maintain focus, when you rebuild your capacity for deep attention, you gain enormous advantages. You can think more clearly. You can work more effectively. You can connect more deeply. You can experience life more fully, because you're actually present for it rather than mentally elsewhere. Now let's address the mental patterns that create the most suffering, because recognizing these patterns is essential for training the mind effectively. Catastrophizing is the mind's tendency to imagine worst-case scenarios and treat them as likely or inevitable. Something small goes wrong and immediately the mind projects forward. This means everything is falling apart. This is going to lead to complete disaster. This pattern creates enormous anxiety about things that will almost certainly never happen. The antidote is reality checking. When you catch yourself catastrophizing, pause and ask, what's actually happening right now? Not what might happen, not what could happen. What is actually occurring in this moment? Usually you'll find that the present reality is far less catastrophic than the imagined future. Then ask, what's the most likely outcome? Which is almost never the catastrophe your mind is projecting. Rumination is the mind's tendency to replay past events, particularly negative ones, over and over. The conversation that went badly, the mistake you made, the thing someone said that hurt you. Your mind returns to these events compulsively, like a tongue probing a sore tooth, creating fresh pain with each return. The antidote is recognizing that rumination is not problem-solving. It feels like you're processing or working through something, but actually you're just reinforcing the neural pathways associated with that painful memory. Real processing involves feeling the emotion, understanding what happened, extracting any lessons, and then consciously letting it go. Rumination is the opposite. It's refusing to let go, clinging to the pain, keeping the wound open. When you catch yourself ruminating, acknowledge it. I'm ruminating again. Then consciously redirect your attention, not suppressing the memory but choosing not to dwell on it. Yes, that happened. I've felt it. I've learned from it. Now I'm choosing to focus my attention elsewhere. And then actually do so, returning your focus to the present moment. Mind reading is the tendency to assume you know what others are thinking, particularly about you. Someone seems distant and you immediately assume they're upset with you. Someone doesn't laugh at your joke and you assume they think you're not funny. This pattern creates enormous unnecessary suffering because you're not responding to reality. You're responding to your interpretation, which is usually more negative than the actual situation. The antidote is recognizing that you cannot know what others are thinking unless they tell you. And even then, people often don't fully know what they're thinking themselves. So any assumption you make about someone's internal state is speculation, not fact. When you catch yourself mind reading, label it, I'm making assumptions. Then return to what you actually know, which is usually far less than what your mind is inventing. All or nothing thinking is the tendency to see things in extremes. You're either perfect or you're a failure. People either love you or hate you. An endeavor either succeeds completely or it's worthless. This pattern creates enormous instability because life rarely exists in these extremes. Most of reality exists in nuances, in gradations in the vast middle ground between absolute success and absolute failure. The antidote is consciously looking for the middle ground. When you catch yourself thinking in absolutes, challenge it. Is this really all or nothing? Or is there a spectrum here? Usually, you'll find that reality is far more nuanced than you're thinking. You didn't fail completely. Some things worked and some didn't. The person isn't judging you harshly. They're mostly preoccupied with their own concerns. The situation isn't catastrophic. It's challenging but manageable. These patterns, catastrophizing, ruminating, mind-reading, all-or-nothing thinking, are extremely common. Most people engage in all of them regularly without recognizing what's happening. But when you train your mind to recognize these patterns as they arise, you can interrupt them. You can choose not to engage. You can redirect your thinking toward more accurate, more helpful interpretations. This is what mental training looks like in practice. Not achieving some perfectly calm, thought-free state, but developing the capacity to see your thoughts clearly and to work with them skillfully, to recognize unhelpful patterns and choose different ones, to notice when your mind is creating unnecessary suffering and to gently redirect it toward more constructive activity. Let me share some additional practices that support mental training, because the more tools you have, the more flexible and effective your practice can be. Labeling thoughts is a simple but powerful practice. Instead of being lost in thought, you observe the thought and label what type it is. Worrying, planning, remembering, judging, fantasizing. This creates instant distance. You're no longer the thought, you're the one observing and categorizing the thought, and that small shift in perspective can interrupt the thought's power over you. You can be very specific with your labels, not just worrying but catastrophizing about work. Not just remembering, but ruminating about yesterday's conversation. The more precise your label, the more clearly you see the pattern and the more power you have to choose differently. The thank you mind technique is useful for persistent thoughts. Your mind keeps returning to the same worry or concern. Instead of fighting with it, you acknowledge it. Thank you, mind, for trying to protect me. I've heard this thought. I don't need to hear it again right now. This appreciates your mind's intent while establishing that you, not the thought, are in control. The what's the next right action practice is useful when your mind is spinning in worry or overwhelm. Instead of staying in abstract mental suffering, you ask, what's the next right action I can take in this situation? This grounds you in the present and in concrete possibility. Even if the action is small, even if it doesn't solve everything, doing something constructive breaks the pattern of mental spinning. The zoom-out practice is useful when you're lost in mental drama. You imagine yourself zooming out, like a camera pulling back. You see yourself in the room, then in the building, then in the city, then from space. This shift in perspective helps you recognize that whatever your mind is dramatizing is, in the larger scheme of things, relatively small, not unimportant, but not worth the level of mental agony you're creating around it. Now let's talk about what happens over time as you consistently train your mind. Because the benefits compound in ways that are difficult to imagine until you experience them. First, you develop what might be called meta-awareness, the ability to observe your own mental processes as they're happening. You catch yourself starting to worry before you're fully caught in the worry. You notice judgment arising before you're completely identified with the judgment. This early detection makes it far easier to redirect, like catching a canoe before it goes over the waterfall, rather than trying to paddle back up after going over. Second, the quality of your thinking improves dramatically. Because you're not wasting mental energy on worry, rumination, and unnecessary drama, that energy becomes available for creative thinking, problem-solving, and genuine insight. Your mind becomes a tool you use rather than a burden you carry. Third, you experience increasing periods of mental quiet. Not silence, thoughts still arise, but a quality of spaciousness. The thoughts are less dense, less urgent, less consuming. There's more space between thoughts, more possibility for presence, more capacity to simply be without constantly thinking about being. Fourth, you become far less reactive emotionally, because you see thoughts as thoughts rather than as truth. They don't trigger automatic emotional responses the way they used to. You can observe an anxious thought without becoming anxious. You can witness an angry thought without acting from anger. This creates profound equanimity. And fifth, you discover a quality of peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances. Because peace is not the absence of challenging thoughts or difficult emotions. Peace is the ability to be present with whatever arises without being disturbed by it. And this ability is developed through mental training. The mind is a wild engine. It races, compares, and complains. This is its untrained state. But it doesn't have to remain that way. Through patient, consistent practice, you can train your mind to be your servant rather than your master, to generate thoughts without dominating you, to be a powerful tool you use rather than a chaos you endure. You don't need to eliminate thoughts. You just need to stop believing all of them, to develop the capacity to observe without identifying, to witness without being consumed, to use your mind consciously rather than being used by it unconsciously. This is the promise of mental training, not perfection, not a problem-free life, not eternal bliss, but the practical capacity to work with your own mind skillfully, to reduce unnecessary suffering, to increase clarity and peace, to be present for your actual life rather than lost in mental fabrication. The training is available to you right now. Start simply. Sit for 5 minutes and watch your breath. Notice when your mind wanders and gently return. Do this daily, and as this foundation becomes solid, add the other practices. Question your thoughts. Fast from unnecessary patterns. Manage your attention consciously. Label your thinking. Challenge your interpretations. Over time, these practices will reshape your mind, not into something it's not, but into what it can be. Clear, focused, peaceful, powerful. A trained mind. Your servant, not your master. And from this foundation of mental training, everything else in your life will transform, because the mind shapes everything. Your experience, your relationships, your work, your sense of self. And when you train the mind, you're not just changing one aspect of your life. You're changing the very lens through which you experience all of life. This is worth your time. This is worth your effort. This is worth your consistent, patient practice. Because mastery of mind is mastery of life itself. Chapter 4. Managing the mood. Emotions are waves. They rise, peak, and fade. This is perhaps the most important truth about emotional experience, and yet it's something most people never fully grasp. Emotions are not permanent states. They are not solid, fixed aspects of who you are. They are temporary movements of energy through your system, arising, intensifying, and eventually subsiding, like waves rolling onto shore. But when you're in the grip of a strong emotion, it doesn't feel temporary. It feels like reality itself. When you're angry, the whole world seems like a place that justifies anger. When you're anxious, everything appears threatening. When you're sad, life itself seems fundamentally disappointing. The emotion colors your entire perception, and you forget that this is just a temporary state, not a permanent truth. You are the ocean beneath them. This is the perspective shift that changes everything. You are not the waves. You are not the emotional weather moving across the surface of your consciousness. You are the deeper presence that witnesses these movements. The ocean doesn't become the waves, even though the waves are made of ocean, and you don't become your emotions, even though they arise within your awareness. This distinction is not semantic. It's the difference between being controlled by your moods and being able to work with them skillfully. When you identify as your emotions, I am angry, I am sad, I am anxious, you have no distance, no perspective, no choice. You are completely merged with the emotional state, and it dictates your behavior. But when you recognize that you are the awareness in which emotions arise, I am experiencing anger. I notice sadness present. I observe anxiety. Suddenly there's space. You haven't eliminated the emotion, but you've created a relationship with it rather than being consumed by it. And in that relationship, choice becomes possible. Don't fight your moods. Learn to breathe through them. This is the practice. This is the skill that most people never develop, because they're too busy trying to either suppress their emotions or act them out immediately. But there's a third option, far more powerful than either suppression or expression. Presence. Presence means being with the emotion fully without being controlled by it. It means feeling it completely without letting it drive your behavior. It means allowing the wave to move through you without being swept away by it. And the primary tool for cultivating this kind of presence is the breath, not as a metaphor but as a literal practical technique. Your breath is the bridge between your voluntary nervous system and your involuntary one. It's the access point where you can influence your autonomic response to emotions. When strong emotion arises, your breathing changes automatically. Anger makes the breath sharp and rapid. Anxiety makes it shallow and quick. Sadness makes it heavy and irregular. These breathing patterns both reflect and reinforce the emotional state. Your body and mind are communicating through the breath, creating a feedback loop that intensifies whatever you're feeling. But you can interrupt this loop. You can consciously change your breathing pattern And in doing so, you signal to your nervous system that you're safe, that you're in control, that this emotion doesn't need to overwhelm your system. This isn't about suppressing the emotion. It's about creating enough space that you can be with it without being consumed by it. When you can stay calm in chaos, your power multiplies, not because you've eliminated chaos or prevented difficult emotions from arising, but because you've developed the capacity to remain centered regardless of what you're feeling. You've learned to be the ocean, not the waves, and from that centered place you can respond to situations with wisdom rather than reacting from emotional overwhelm. Let me show you what this looks like in practice. Because emotional management is not abstract philosophy. It's concrete skill that can be learned and refined through deliberate practice. When a strong emotion arises, let's say anger, because it's one of the most challenging, your first automatic response is likely one of two extremes. Either you immediately express it, lashing out verbally or behaviorally, or you immediately suppress it, pushing it down and pretending you're not feeling it. Both of these responses are forms of being controlled by the emotion. Expression is being controlled into action. Suppression is being controlled into denial. But there's a third way. When you feel anger arising, you pause. You don't act on it, and you don't pretend it's not there. Instead, you turn your attention to your body. Where do you feel the anger physically? Perhaps heat in your chest. Perhaps tension in your jaw. Perhaps energy in your hands wanting to clench into fists. You notice these sensations with curiosity rather than judgment. Then you bring your attention to your breath. You notice how it's changed, probably faster, shallower, more agitated, and you begin to consciously slow it down, not forcing anything, not creating tension, but gently extending the exhale. Breathing in for 4 counts, out for 6, or whatever ratio feels natural but is longer on the exhale than the inhale. As you do this, something remarkable happens. The anger doesn't disappear and it's still present, but it begins to soften. The sharp edges dull slightly. The compulsion to act on it decreases. You create space between you and the emotion. You're still feeling it, but you're no longer possessed by it. From this slightly more spacious place, you can make a conscious choice about how to respond. Maybe you need to address the situation that triggered the anger. But now you can do so from clarity rather than rage. Maybe you recognize that the anger is about something else entirely, and the current situation just activated it. Maybe you see that acting on the anger right now would create more problems than it would solve, and you choose to wait until you're more settled. This is emotional management, not elimination, not suppression, but creating enough space through breath and presence that you can be with the emotion without being controlled by it, and then choosing your response consciously rather than reacting automatically. Now let's go deeper into the nature of emotions and why they arise, because understanding them helps you work with them more effectively. Emotions are information. This is crucial to understand. They're not problems to be fixed or enemies to be defeated. They're messengers bringing you information about your internal state, your needs, your boundaries, your values. The challenge is that most people either ignore the message or get so caught up in the emotion that they can't hear the message clearly. Anger, for instance, often carries the message that a boundary has been violated or that something important to you is being threatened. It's activating energy, designed to help you protect yourself or address an injustice. This is valuable information. But when you're consumed by anger, you can't access this information clearly. You just react. And when you suppress anger, you ignore the message entirely, leaving the boundary violation unaddressed. Anxiety often carries the message that you need to prepare for something, or that you're facing uncertainty that your mind is trying to resolve. It's your system's way of trying to keep you safe by alerting you to potential threats. Again, valuable information. But when you're consumed by anxiety, it spirals into catastrophizing and becomes debilitating. And when you suppress it, you miss the message that maybe you do need to prepare or address something. Sadness often carries the message that you've lost something important or that a need isn't being met. It invites you to slow down, to reflect, to honor what matters to you. But when you're consumed by sadness, it becomes depression. And when you suppress it, you deny yourself the processing that grief requires. So the practice is to feel the emotion fully enough to receive its message, but not so fully that you're overwhelmed by it. To be present to what it's telling you without being consumed by the intensity of it. This is the balance, and it's achieved through the practices we're exploring. Breath, presence, creating space. Let me give you specific techniques for working with different emotional states, because while the principles are universal, the application varies depending on what you're experiencing. For anger, The key is to discharge the physical energy without doing damage. Anger creates a surge of activation in your body, adrenaline, cortisol, muscle tension. This energy needs to move. If you just sit with intense anger without any outlet, it can feel unbearable. So you give it a constructive outlet: physical exercise, punching a pillow, writing aggressively in a journal, anything that allows the energy to move through your system without harming yourself, others, or your environment. As you do this, you maintain awareness. You're not lost in the anger, feeding it with thoughts about how justified you are or how wrong the other person is. You're simply allowing the physical activation to discharge while you breathe and observe. And as the physical intensity decreases, you can access the message beneath the anger more clearly. For anxiety, the key is to ground in the present moment, because anxiety is always about the future, about what might happen, what could go wrong. It pulls your attention away from now and into imagined scenarios, so you anchor yourself deliberately in present reality. The 5-4-3-2-1 technique is powerful here. Name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. This forces your attention back into sensory experience, which only exists in the present. You can't see, hear, touch, smell, or taste the future, so engaging your senses breaks the anxiety's grip on your attention. Combine this with conscious breathing, longer exhales to activate your parasympathetic nervous system, and the anxiety begins to settle. Not disappear necessarily, but become manageable rather than overwhelming. For sadness, the key is to allow it without drowning in it. Sadness needs to be felt, needs to move through you. Suppressing it just stores it in your body where it becomes stuck, creating depression. But being consumed by it, ruminating endlessly, also doesn't help it process. So you create a container for it. You might set aside specific time to feel sad, 20 minutes where you allow yourself to cry, to feel the heaviness, to be with the loss or disappointment. You're not wallowing indefinitely, but you're also not suppressing. You're giving the emotion its due, honoring what it's trying to tell you, and then gently returning to engagement with life. Physical movement is also helpful with sadness. Walking, especially in nature, allows the emotion to move through you while preventing you from getting stuck in immobility. For overwhelm, the key is to slow everything down. Overwhelm happens when your mind is trying to process too much at once, when you're pulled in too many directions, when everything feels urgent and important simultaneously. The solution is radical simplification. Stop, sit down, close your eyes. Take 10 slow breaths, counting each one. Nothing else. Just breath and counting. This interrupts the scattered energy of overwhelm and creates a point of focus. Then, when you're slightly more settled, you write down everything that's contributing to the overwhelm. Get it all out of your head and onto paper. This alone often reduces the intensity, because your mind no longer has to hold all of it simultaneously. Finally, you choose one thing, just one, to address right now. Not everything. Not even the most important thing necessarily. Just one actionable thing, and you do that. Because action breaks overwhelm more effectively than thinking about overwhelm ever will. Now let's talk about mood patterns, because most people have habitual emotional states they return to repeatedly, and recognizing your patterns is essential for managing them. Some people have a default mood of anxiety. Their baseline is a low-grade worry about what might go wrong. They're always scanning for threats, always preparing for problems, always in a state of vigilance. This becomes so familiar that it feels normal, and calm states actually feel strange and uncomfortable. Others have a default mood of irritation. They're easily annoyed, quick to find fault, perpetually dissatisfied with how things are. This also becomes normalized, and they don't even realize they're spending most of their life in a state of low-grade anger. Still others default to sadness or melancholy. They tend to focus on what's missing, what's been lost, what's disappointing. This lens colors everything, and they struggle to feel genuine joy or satisfaction, even when positive things happen. Recognizing your default mood is powerful because once you see it, you realize it's not reality and it's a habit. It's a pattern your nervous system has learned to return to, often because it was adaptive at some point in your past. But it's not fixed. It's not who you are. It's just a habit, and habits can be changed. The practice is to notice when you're in your default mood and to consciously choose something different, not forcing positivity, not pretending everything is great, but simply choosing neutrality. Choosing to not add the layer of anxiety, irritation, or sadness to whatever is actually happening. This is remarkably difficult at first because the default mood is so automatic, so deeply grooved. But with patient, consistent practice, you can shift your baseline. You can train your nervous system to return to a different default state, one of calm awareness rather than anxiety, or peaceful acceptance rather than irritation, or quiet contentment rather than sadness. Let me share something crucial about emotional regulation. It's not about achieving constant happiness or positive emotions. That's not the goal. That's actually impossible and would be undesirable even if it were possible. You're a human being, which means you will experience the full range of human emotions. Difficulty, loss, challenge. These are inevitable parts of life, and they come with challenging emotions. The goal is not to eliminate difficult emotions. The goal is to not suffer unnecessarily because of them, to not amplify them through resistance or identification, to not let them control your behavior in ways you'll later regret, to be able to feel fully while remaining centered. This is equanimity, not the absence of emotion but the presence of balance. The ability to experience whatever arises without being destabilized by it, to feel intensely while remaining grounded, to be moved without being swept away. And equanimity is developed through practice, through repeatedly experiencing emotions while maintaining awareness, through learning again and again that you can feel anger without acting from anger, anxiety without being paralyzed by anxiety, sadness without drowning in sadness. Each time you do this, you're training your nervous system. You're teaching it, we can handle this. We can feel this without falling apart. We can be with this without being consumed by it. And over time, this capacity strengthens. Emotions that once overwhelmed you become manageable. States that once controlled you become experiences you can be present with. Now let's discuss the relationship between thoughts and emotions. Because they're intimately connected, and understanding this connection gives you additional tools for emotional management. Emotions are not caused directly by events. They're caused by your thoughts about events. This is a fundamental insight from cognitive psychology, and it has profound implications. Two people experience the same event and have completely different emotional responses because they're thinking different thoughts about it. You give a presentation at work. Person A thinks that went terribly. Everyone could see how nervous I was. They probably think I'm incompetent. Result, shame and anxiety. Person B thinks that was challenging and I got through it. I learned what to improve for next time. Result, satisfaction and determination. Same event. Different thoughts, different emotions. This means that by changing your thoughts, you can change your emotions. Not by positive thinking or denial of reality, but by examining whether your thoughts are accurate and helpful, and choosing different interpretations when the automatic ones are creating unnecessary suffering. When you notice a difficult emotion, trace it back to the thought that generated it. What were you thinking just before the emotion arose? Often you'll find an interpretation or assumption that isn't necessarily true or isn't the only way to view the situation. And when you question that thought, when you find alternative ways to interpret what happened, the emotion shifts. This doesn't work for all emotions. Some arise from direct physical threat or loss, and no amount of cognitive reframing will eliminate them. But many of the emotions you experience daily are generated by thoughts that, upon examination, are questionable at best. And in those cases, working with the thoughts is an efficient way to work with the emotions. Let me share practices for building long-term emotional resilience. Because managing moods is not just about responding to difficult emotions as they arise. It's also about building a foundation that makes you less vulnerable to emotional overwhelm in general. Physical foundation. Your emotional state is deeply connected to your physical state. When you're sleep-deprived, undernourished, dehydrated, or physically exhausted, your emotional regulation capacity plummets. Things that wouldn't normally bother you become triggering. Situations you could normally handle become overwhelming. So foundational self-care, adequate sleep, nourishing food, hydration, movement, is actually emotional regulation practice. Nervous system regulation. Your autonomic nervous system has two primary states. Sympathetic activation, the stress response, fight or flight, and parasympathetic activation, the rest and digest response. Most people in modern life are chronically in sympathetic activation, which makes them emotionally reactive and easily overwhelmed. Practices that activate the parasympathetic system, slow breathing, gentle movement, time in nature, meaningful connection, Build resilience by allowing your nervous system to rest and reset regularly. Emotional vocabulary. Many people have a very limited emotional vocabulary. They know good and bad, happy and sad, maybe a few others. But there are dozens of nuanced emotional states, and being able to name them precisely helps you work with them effectively. Frustrated feels different than disappointed, which feels different than discouraged. When you can name exactly what you're feeling, you can address it more skillfully. Regular processing. Just as physical hygiene requires regular attention, emotional hygiene does too. This means creating regular time to check in with yourself, to feel what needs to be felt, to process what needs to be processed before it accumulates. This might be through journaling, through conversation with a trusted person, through therapy, or through simple quiet reflection. The form doesn't matter. What matters is not letting emotional material build up unaddressed. Now let's talk about emotional contagion and boundaries, because you're not just managing your own emotional states. You're constantly affected by the emotional states of those around you. Emotions are contagious. This is neurologically verifiable. Mirror neurons in your brain activate when you observe emotions in others, causing you to feel echoes of what they're feeling. This is the basis of empathy, and it's essential for human connection. But it also means you can be pulled into emotional states that aren't yours. You're calm and centered, and then you spend time with someone who's anxious, and suddenly you're anxious too. You're in a good mood, and then you encounter someone who's angry, and your mood drops. This isn't weakness or lack of discipline. It's how human nervous systems work. We're designed to attune to each other. But you can develop emotional boundaries, not walls that cut you off from others, but permeable membranes that allow you to sense others' emotions without being overwhelmed by them. To be empathetic without losing your own center. The practice is awareness. When you notice your emotional state shifting after being with someone, you pause and ask, "Is this mine?" Often you'll realize you've absorbed their anxiety, their stress, their mood. And recognizing this creates choice. You can consciously release what's not yours. You can maintain compassion for their experience without taking it on as your own. This is especially important if you're in helping roles, parenting, teaching, healthcare, counseling. You must be able to be present to others' emotions without drowning in them. And this capacity is built through the practices we've explored. Grounding, breathing, maintaining awareness of your own state, creating space. Let me address one more crucial aspect of emotional management: the relationship between control and acceptance. There's a paradox here. You develop the capacity to work with your emotions skillfully, to influence your moods, to regulate your states. But you also need to accept that you cannot control emotions directly. You cannot simply decide not to feel something and have it disappear. Emotions arise based on complex interactions between your thoughts, your nervous system, your circumstances, your history. They have their own intelligence, their own timing, their own process. The skill is in the middle ground. You cannot force emotions to appear or disappear, but you can create conditions that make certain emotional states more or less likely. You can influence the duration and intensity of emotions through how you work with them. You can choose how you respond to emotions behaviorally, even when you can't choose what you feel. This is the balance, acceptance of what you feel, combined with skillful action in response to what you feel. Not trying to force yourself to feel differently, but also not being passively controlled by however you happen to feel in any given moment. When you can stay calm in chaos, your power multiplies. Not because you never feel difficult emotions, but because you've developed the capacity to be with them without being consumed, to feel fully while remaining centered, to be moved without being swept away. This is mastery, not control in the sense of domination or suppression, but mastery in the sense of skillful relationship. You know your emotional patterns. You understand the relationship between your thoughts and your feelings. You have practices for grounding when you're activated, and for allowing when you're resistant. You can be present to the full range of human emotion while maintaining your center, your clarity, your capacity to choose wise action. Emotions are waves. They rise, peak, and fade. This is their nature. And you are the ocean beneath them, vast, deep, unshakable. It's not because the waves don't affect you, but because you're not defined by them. You're not consumed by them. You remain yourself, present and aware as the emotional weather moves through. This is the freedom that emotional management creates. Not freedom from feeling, but freedom to feel fully without being controlled. to experience the richness of human emotion while maintaining the stability that allows you to live wisely, love deeply, and respond to life with grace rather than reactivity. The practices are here. The path is clear. Begin with the breath. Return to the present moment. Create space between you and your emotions. Feel them fully while remaining centered. And watch as your relationship with your emotional life transforms from one of being tossed around by every mood to one of dancing skillfully with whatever arises. This is your birthright. This is your capacity. This is what becomes possible when you learn to manage your moods with awareness, presence, and skill. Chapter 6, The Calm Within Chaos. You can't control everything, but you can control your response to everything. This is the ultimate truth. The final understanding. The wisdom that transforms suffering into peace. Life will bring storms. Circumstances will shift without your permission. People will act in ways you cannot predict. Events will unfold that you did not choose. You cannot control the weather of the world. You cannot force reality to match your preferences. You cannot make life behave according to your plans, but you can control something far more powerful. Something that changes everything, even when nothing external changes. You can control your response, not your initial reaction. That's often automatic, biological, beyond immediate control. The flash of anger, the spike of fear, the wave of disappointment, these arise on their own. They're human, natural, part of having a nervous system that responds to the world. But what comes after that initial reaction? That's where your power lives. That's where your choice exists. That's where mastery is demonstrated. Do you feed the reaction? Do you build a story around it? Do you let it dictate your words, your actions, your state? Or do you observe it, acknowledge it? Let it be present without letting it control you? This choice and this sacred space between stimulus and response, this is where your peace lives, not in perfect circumstances, not in the absence of challenge, not in a life where nothing difficult ever happens, but in your response, in your ability to remain centered when everything around you is turbulent, in your capacity to choose how you meet what arises. That's where your peace lives. And it's always available, always accessible, always within your control. When you stop chasing control outside, you begin mastering it inside. Most people spend their entire lives trying to control the external, trying to arrange circumstances perfectly, trying to make people behave correctly, trying to force life to cooperate with their preferences. They believe peace comes from perfect conditions, from everything going right, from no challenges appearing, from everyone understanding them and treating them well. But this is a losing game, because the external is vast, complex, unpredictable, full of variables you cannot influence, shaped by forces beyond your reach. You exhaust yourself trying to control what cannot be controlled. You create suffering by demanding that reality be different than it is. You lose your peace by insisting that circumstances align with your wishes. And even when you temporarily succeed, when you arrange things just right, when people cooperate, when conditions are favorable, it doesn't last, because the external is always changing, always shifting, always moving beyond your control. So you're constantly fighting, constantly adjusting, constantly anxious that the careful arrangement will fall apart. This is not peace. This is not freedom. This is exhausting. But when you stop chasing control outside, when you release the futile attempt to make the world behave, something profound happens. You begin mastering it inside. You turn your attention to the one domain where control is actually possible, your own response. You can't control whether someone is rude to you, but you can control whether you react with anger or respond with calm. You can't control whether you face obstacles, but you can control whether you meet them with resilience or collapse in defeat. You can't control whether life brings loss, but you can control whether you let loss destroy you or whether you grieve with grace and continue forward. This internal mastery is the only control that matters, the only control that's real, the only control that brings lasting peace. And that's the kind of power no one can take from you. External power is fragile. It depends on circumstances, on resources, on other people's cooperation. It can be lost in a moment, stripped away by forces beyond your control. But internal power, the power of self-mastery, the ability to remain centered regardless of circumstances, no one can take that from you. No event can strip it away. No loss can destroy it. It's yours, completely, permanently, unshakably yours. Once developed, it remains. Through all seasons, through all challenges, through all changes, you carry it with you. Into every situation, into every relationship, into every moment of your life. This is freedom. Not freedom from difficulty, but freedom within difficulty. The capacity to meet whatever arises with inner stability. Let's explore what this looks like in practice, because understanding is one thing. Living it is another. Imagine you're facing a situation that's beyond your control. Perhaps a relationship is ending. Perhaps a job is lost. Perhaps health is challenged. Perhaps plans have fallen apart. The situation is real. The challenge is genuine. The difficulty is not imaginary. Your old pattern might be to fight reality, to resist what's happening, to demand that circumstances be different, to spiral into anxiety about what you cannot control. This shouldn't be happening. I need to fix this. I can't accept this. What if I can't handle this? This pattern creates tremendous suffering because you're at war with reality, fighting what is, demanding what isn't. And reality always wins that fight. Always. Reality is what it is, regardless of your preferences. But there's another way, the way of inner mastery. You feel the initial reaction, the shock, the disappointment, the fear. You don't suppress these. You acknowledge them. Yes, this is difficult. Yes, I'm feeling strong emotions. But then you pause, you breathe, and you ask yourself a different question. Not, how do I control this situation, but how do I want to respond to this situation? Not, how do I make this different, but how do I meet this with strength? Not, what can I control out there, but what can I control in here? This shift in focus changes everything, because suddenly, you're no longer helpless. You're no longer at the mercy of circumstances. You have choice. Real choice. The choice of response. The choice of how you carry yourself through this. The choice of who you become in the midst of challenge. You might choose to respond with dignity, to face the difficulty without losing your center, to feel the pain without letting it destroy your peace. You might choose to respond with wisdom, to see what can be learned, to find meaning in the struggle, to use the challenge as fuel for growth. You might choose to respond with grace, to accept what is while working toward what could be, to surrender to reality while still taking constructive action. These choices are always available, always within your power, always yours to make. And when you make them, when you respond from inner mastery rather than from reactive chaos, you discover something remarkable. You're okay. Even in the midst of difficulty. Even when circumstances are far from ideal. Even when nothing is going according to plan. You're okay because your okayness doesn't depend on external conditions. It comes from within, from your capacity to remain centered, from your ability to meet life with presence rather than panic. This is the calm within chaos, not the absence of chaos, but the presence of calm regardless of chaos. Let's go deeper into what creates this inner calm, because it's not just a concept, it's a practice, a skill, something developed through specific approaches. First, there's acceptance, true acceptance, not resignation or passivity, but the clear-eyed recognition of what is. Most suffering comes from arguing with reality, from insisting that what is should be different, from fighting against circumstances you cannot change. This shouldn't have happened. That person shouldn't have acted that way. Life should be easier. I should be further along. All of this is war with reality, and reality doesn't negotiate. It simply is. But when you accept what is, truly accept it, not just intellectually but experientially, the war ends. The struggle ceases. Peace becomes possible. Acceptance doesn't mean you like what's happening. It doesn't mean you stop working to improve things. It doesn't mean you become passive. It means you stop adding suffering to difficulty. You stop creating additional pain through resistance to what already is. You acknowledge, this is what's happening right now. I don't prefer it. I'm working to change what I can, but I accept that this is the current reality. This acceptance creates space. Space to breathe. Space to think clearly. Space to respond skillfully rather than react desperately. Second, there's perspective. The ability to see beyond the immediate moment. To recognize that this too shall pass. That difficulty is temporary even when it feels permanent. When you're in the midst of chaos, it's easy to believe it will last forever, that you'll always feel this way, that circumstances will never improve. But this is an illusion created by present moment intensity, a cognitive distortion that treats current state as permanent state. The truth is, everything changes, everything passes, storm clouds move, seasons shift, circumstances evolve. This challenge you're facing? It's temporary. Not in the sense that you should dismiss it or pretend it doesn't matter, but in the sense that it won't last forever. Remembering this doesn't eliminate the difficulty, but it does prevent you from drowning in it, from believing that this moment defines your entire existence. You can endure what you know is temporary. You can maintain calm when you remember that chaos is not your permanent state. Third, there's breath. Simple, physical, always available. Your breath is the bridge between mind and body, between conscious and unconscious, between reaction and response. When chaos strikes, your breath changes. It becomes shallow, rapid, held. Your body activates into stress response, and this physiological activation feeds mental chaos. Your racing heart tells your brain danger. Your shallow breathing signals threat. Your tense muscles communicate emergency. The mind responds to these body signals by generating more anxiety, more urgency, more panic. But you can interrupt this cycle right at the beginning. Through conscious breath, when you notice chaos, internal or external, return to your breath. Deliberately, intentionally, slowly, breathe in deeply. Hold briefly. Breathe out slowly. Repeat. This simple act sends different signals to your brain. We're okay. There's no immediate danger. We have time to respond thoughtfully. Your nervous system calms. Your mind clears. Space opens between stimulus and response. From this calmer state, you can access the inner mastery that chaos had temporarily obscured. You can choose your response rather than being controlled by reaction. Breath is always with you, in every moment, in every circumstance. No matter how chaotic things become, you can always return to your breath. And in that return, you reclaim your center. You remember your power. You access the calm that exists beneath all chaos. Fourth, there's presence. The practice of staying in this moment rather than spiraling into imagined futures or ruminated pasts. Chaos often exists more in our projections than in present reality. We imagine terrible outcomes. We replay past difficulties. We create entire narratives of catastrophe in our minds, and we suffer these imagined scenarios as if they're real, as if they're happening right now, but they're not. They're thoughts, projections, stories, not present reality. Present reality, this actual moment right now, is often manageable. Even when it's difficult, it's just this. Just now. Just what's actually here. When you bring your attention fully to the present moment, chaos often diminishes. Because you're no longer carrying the weight of imagined futures and replayed pasts. You're just here, in this breath, in this moment. Dealing with what's actually present rather than what might happen or what already happened. This doesn't mean ignoring the future or denying the past. It means not suffering them when they're not actually here. Not creating additional chaos through mental time travel. Stay here. Now. This moment. This breath. This choice. This response. From this grounded presence, you can meet whatever arises with much greater calm and clarity. Fifth, there's surrender. Perhaps the most misunderstood practice. Because surrender is not defeat. It's not giving up. It's not passive resignation. Surrender is releasing the need to control what you cannot control. It's letting go of the demand that reality conform to your preferences. It's accepting your human limitation while accessing your genuine power. You cannot control the storm, but you can secure your vessel. You can adjust your sails. You can navigate with skill. You cannot control other people, but you can control your response to them. You can set boundaries. You can choose your level of engagement. You cannot control outcomes, but you can control your effort, your attitude, your integrity in the process. This is the paradox of surrender. By releasing control over what you cannot control, you access deeper control over what you actually can. You stop wasting energy fighting the uncontrollable, and that energy becomes available for what is controllable: your response, your state, your choices. Surrender is wisdom. It's the recognition of reality, the acceptance of what is within your power and what isn't. And this recognition brings profound peace, because you're no longer exhausting yourself with impossible battles. You're focusing your power where it actually makes a difference. Now let's talk about what this inner calm looks like when it's embodied. What changes when you develop this mastery? Externally, you become steady, reliable, a source of stability for others. When everyone else is panicking, you remain composed. When chaos surrounds you, you emanate calm. This isn't because you're unfeeling or detached. It's because you've learned to separate circumstance from response, to feel fully while still choosing how you act. People notice this quality. They're drawn to it. They feel safer around you because your stability helps regulate their nervous systems. You become an anchor in the storm. Not because you control the storm, but because you remain unshaken by it. Internally, you experience profound peace. Not the peace of perfect circumstances, but the peace of knowing you can handle whatever arises. You're not afraid of challenge because you trust your capacity to respond to it. You're not threatened by change because you know your center remains regardless. This creates a deep, abiding sense of okayness, a baseline calm that circumstances cannot destroy. You still feel emotions. You still face difficulty. But beneath it all, there's this steady knowing. I can handle this. I have what I need. I'll be okay. This knowing is freedom, the deepest freedom possible. Not freedom from circumstance, but freedom within any circumstance. In relationships, you stop trying to control others. You release the need for people to behave according to your expectations. You love without demanding. You connect without clinging. This doesn't mean accepting mistreatment or having no boundaries. It means recognizing that others' behavior is beyond your control, while your response is entirely within it. You can love someone and let them be themselves. You can care about someone and accept their choices. You can stay connected while remaining sovereign. This creates healthier, more authentic relationships, because you're relating from wholeness rather than need, from choice rather than demand, from love rather than control. In work, you stop being controlled by external validation. You do excellent work because that's who you are. Not because you need recognition. You're not thrown by criticism or inflated by praise. You receive feedback without letting it determine your worth. You stay steady in your purpose regardless of others' opinions. This makes you remarkably effective. Because you're not performing for approval. You're creating from authenticity, and that produces work of genuine value. In difficult times, you become a fortress. Not hard or closed, but unshakable. You feel the difficulty fully while remaining grounded in your center. You grieve without being destroyed. You struggle without giving up. You hurt without losing hope because you know this is temporary. You are not this circumstance. You are the awareness that experiences circumstance, and that awareness remains constant and clear, regardless of what passes through it. Let's also acknowledge what inner mastery doesn't mean, because there are common misconceptions that create confusion. Inner mastery doesn't mean emotional suppression. You don't become robotic or detached. You feel fully. You just don't let feelings control you. Inner mastery doesn't mean passive acceptance of everything. You still work to improve circumstances. You just don't suffer while doing so. You act from clarity rather than desperation. Inner mastery doesn't mean isolation from others. You remain deeply connected. You just connect from sovereignty rather than neediness, from choice rather than dependency. Inner mastery doesn't mean you never struggle. You do, you're human, but you struggle skillfully. You move through difficulty without losing yourself in it. Inner mastery doesn't mean achieving perfect calm at all times. Your nervous system will still activate. Emotions will still arise strongly, but you recover faster. You don't spiral. You return to center more quickly. Understanding these distinctions helps you practice more skillfully. You're not trying to become something inhuman. You're learning to be fully human while remaining centered in awareness. Finally, let's talk about how to develop this mastery. Because it's not something you either have or don't. It's something you build through practice. Start with small challenges. Don't wait for major crises to practice inner mastery. Practice with daily annoyances, traffic, delayed packages, minor disappointments. These are perfect training grounds. Low stakes. Safe space to experiment with choosing your response rather than defaulting to reaction. Notice when you're reacting. Pause. Breathe. Choose how you want to respond instead. This simple practice, repeated hundreds of times with small challenges, builds the capacity you'll need for larger ones. Practice presence daily. Not just when chaos strikes, but as a regular practice, through meditation, through mindful activities, through moments of deliberate awareness. The more familiar you are with present moment awareness in calm times, the more accessible it becomes in chaotic times. Work with your body. Your inner state is deeply connected to your physical state. Regular movement, adequate rest, conscious breathing. These aren't separate from mental mastery. They're its foundation. When your body is regulated, maintaining inner calm becomes much easier. When your body is dysregulated, inner mastery is significantly harder. Study your patterns. Notice when you lose your center. What situations trigger reactive chaos? What circumstances make inner mastery difficult? This isn't about judgment. It's about data. Understanding your patterns helps you prepare for them. You know your triggers so you can meet them consciously rather than being ambushed. Reflect regularly. At day's end, review. When did I maintain inner mastery today? When did I lose it? What helped me stay centered? What pulled me into reaction? This reflection strengthens your capacity. You're learning from experience, recognizing what works, building self-awareness that makes future mastery more accessible. Be patient with yourself. This is lifelong practice, not quick achievement. You'll lose your center sometimes. You'll react when you meant to respond. You'll get caught in chaos when you wanted to stay calm. This is normal. Expected. Part of the process. The practice isn't never losing center. It's returning to center more quickly each time. And you are returning more quickly. With each practice. With each repetition. With each conscious choice to respond rather than react. You're building the capacity, strengthening the neural pathways, developing the skill of inner mastery that serves you for the rest of your life. The calm within chaos isn't about eliminating chaos. Life will always bring challenges. Circumstances will always change. Difficulty will always arise, but you can develop the capacity to remain centered through it all. To meet whatever comes with inner stability, to respond from wisdom rather than react from panic. This capacity is your birthright, your natural state beneath all conditioning. The peace that exists at your core waiting to be accessed. It's not somewhere else, not something you need to achieve. It's already here, already yours, always available. You just need to remember it, to practice accessing it, to strengthen your ability to rest in it regardless of external circumstances. And with practice, with patience, with commitment to this path, you'll discover the calm that exists within all chaos, the peace that no circumstance can destroy, the mastery that no one can take from you. This is your power. This is your freedom. This is your peace, not in perfect circumstances, but in your response to all circumstances, in the sacred space between what happens and how you choose to meet it. That space is where you live, where your power resides, where freedom is found. You can't control everything, but you can control your response to everything. And that response, and that conscious, chosen, skillful response, that's where your peace lives. Always accessible. Always available. Always yours. The calm within chaos, not the absence of chaos, but the presence of calm, steady, unshakable, regardless. This is mastery. This is freedom. This is peace, and it's yours to claim. Right now. In this moment. Through the choice to meet whatever arises with inner stability. The chaos may continue, but you remain calm. Centered. Free. That's the power no one can take from you. That's the peace that's always been yours. Welcome home to your center. Welcome to the calm within chaos. Welcome to the freedom of inner mastery. It's been here all along, waiting for you to remember, to return, to rest in what you've always been, calm, steady, unshakable. This is who you are. This is your truth. This is your power, and nothing external can ever change that. The freedom of mastery, real peace, is not the absence of problems. It's the presence of control, not control over the world, not control over circumstances, not control over other people, but control over yourself, your responses, your words, your thoughts, your energy. This is the only control that matters, the only control that's real, the only control that brings lasting peace. And you've learned how to access it through these chapters, through these practices, through this journey from chaos to calm. You've learned that control begins with awareness, that you cannot master what you don't notice, that the first step is always seeing clearly, seeing your thoughts before they become words, your impulses before they become actions, your emotions before they become states. You've learned to master your mouth, to recognize that every word carries energy, that silence is often more powerful than speech, that speaking with intention, rather than impulse, changes everything about how you move through the world. You've learned to train your mind, to observe thoughts without believing all of them, to create space between stimulus and response, to be the master of your mental landscape rather than its victim. You've learned to manage your moods, to understand that emotions are waves you can ride rather than storms that must destroy you, that beneath all feeling there's a steady awareness that remains calm. You've learned about the energy of money, that financial discipline reflects inner discipline, that your relationship with resources mirrors your relationship with yourself, that abundance flows from clarity, not chaos. And you've learned about the calm within chaos, that you cannot control everything external, but you can always control your response, that this response is where your power lives, that freedom comes not from perfect circumstances, but from inner mastery regardless of circumstances. When you master your words, thoughts, mood, and money, you don't just live better, you live lighter. The weight you've been carrying, the weight of constant reaction, of emotional chaos, of undisciplined habits, of internal conflict, and it begins to lift. You're not fighting yourself anymore. You're not at war with your impulses. You're not controlled by every passing mood or thought. Instead, you're aligned, integrated, whole. Your actions flow from your values rather than from reactivity. Your words reflect your wisdom rather than your wounds. Your choices create peace rather than problems. This alignment creates lightness, not the lightness of having no responsibilities or challenges, but the lightness of moving through life without the burden of constant internal conflict. You're no longer carrying the weight of broken promises to yourself, the guilt of words spoken in anger, the shame of actions taken in impulse, the anxiety of resources wasted through lack of discipline. Instead, you're carrying the lightness of integrity, of self-trust, of knowing that you can rely on yourself to respond skillfully, to speak wisely, to choose consciously. This is what mastery creates, not perfection. You'll still struggle, still make mistakes, still face challenges, but lightness, the ability to move through life with grace rather than constant turbulence, because freedom isn't doing whatever you want. It's being so disciplined that nothing controls you anymore. This is the paradox most people never understand. They believe freedom comes from having no constraints, from being able to act on every impulse, from never having to exercise control, but that's not freedom. That's slavery to impulse, slavery to mood, slavery to every passing desire or emotion. True freedom comes from discipline, from developing such mastery over yourself that external circumstances cannot dictate your internal state, that impulses cannot override your intentions, that emotions cannot control your choices. When you have this discipline, you're free to choose your responses rather than being forced into reactions, free to create the life you want rather than constantly managing the chaos you've created, free to be who you truly are rather than who your uncontrolled impulses make you. This freedom is profound. It's not the freedom to do anything. It's the freedom from being controlled by anything, free from the need to react when provoked, free from the compulsion to speak every thought, free from being thrown by every emotion, free from financial stress created by undisciplined choices, free to respond consciously, free to speak intentionally, free to feel fully while remaining centered, free to use resources wisely. This is the freedom of mastery, and it's yours now. Not perfectly, not completely, but genuinely, really truly, you've developed the awareness. You've learned the practices. You've understood the principles. Now, it's just a matter of living them, daily, consistently, with patience for yourself when you fall short and commitment to return to center when you lose it. Because mastery is not a destination, it's a practice. a lifelong journey of returning again and again to conscious choice, to intentional response, to disciplined action. Some days will be easy. You'll maintain your center effortlessly. Your words will flow with wisdom. Your thoughts will remain clear. Your emotions will be manageable. Your choices will align with your values. Other days will be hard. You'll lose your center repeatedly. You'll speak before thinking. You'll believe troubling thoughts. You'll be swept by emotion. You'll act impulsively. Both are part of the practice. Both are part of being human. The goal isn't perfect days every day. The goal is returning to mastery more quickly each time you lose it, and you will return more quickly. With each practice, with each repetition, with each conscious choice to remember who you are beneath the chaos. You're someone who notices before reacting, someone who speaks with intention, someone who observes thoughts without becoming them, someone who feels emotions without being controlled by them, someone who uses resources consciously. This is who you're becoming, through practice, through patience, through persistent return to these principles. And as you become this person, everything changes. Not overnight, not dramatically, but steadily, gradually, undeniably. Your relationships improve because you're not reactive. Your work improves because you're focused. Your finances improve because you're disciplined. Your inner life improves because you're aware. And most importantly, you trust yourself. Because you've proven through countless small choices that you can rely on yourself to show up with consciousness rather than chaos. This self-trust is the foundation of all peace. When you trust yourself to respond skillfully, you're not afraid of what life brings. You know you'll handle it, not perfectly, but well enough. And that knowing, that deep, earned knowing, is freedom. So take these practices forward, into your daily life, into every situation, into every challenge and every calm moment. Remember to pause before speaking, to observe before judging, to breathe before reacting, to choose consciously rather than acting impulsively. Remember that awareness is the foundation, that you cannot master what you don't notice, that the practice begins with seeing clearly. Remember that discipline is not restriction, it's freedom. Freedom from being controlled by impulse, freedom to create the life you want. Remember that mastery is not perfection, it's practice. The practice of returning to center, of choosing consciousness, of responding rather than reacting. You have everything you need. The awareness, the practices, the understanding. Now you simply live it, day by day, choice by choice, moment by moment. And in that living you discover something beautiful. Peace is always available, not in perfect circumstances, but in conscious response to all circumstances. That peace is your birthright, your natural state, your true home. Welcome home to yourself. Welcome to the freedom of mastery. Welcome to the peace that comes from self-control. It's been here all along, waiting for you to remember, to practice, to return, and now you have. Now you know. Now you're free, free to live consciously, free to respond skillfully, free to create peace through mastery. This is your power. This is your freedom. This is your peace, the discipline of self-control, the mastery of words, thoughts, and energy, the calm within chaos, the freedom within discipline. All of it is yours, now and always, through practice and patience, through awareness and choice. Welcome to mastery. Welcome to freedom. Welcome to peace. The journey continues, and you're ready for it, steady, aware, disciplined, free.